Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time out to join the discussion. Entitled, as you can see, The Effective Mentor. And broadly, what we're talking about this afternoon is a combination of understanding and a state of being, so doing type things. So the understanding for being an effective mentor is really understanding both coaching and mentoring, and we'll explore that, and I'll explain why that's important as we move through. And really, it's one of those great things where you can take somebody out of their workplace. And so we're talking about potential to a large extent this afternoon, which is one of the real focus areas for coaching and mentoring, where in the workplace, by and large, our development is more professional by nature and is much more around trying to increase performance in our roles in the workplace. And so there's a broad kind of focus in terms of the design of this afternoon's discussion, but as the name implies, it really is aimed more towards people who are mentoring, people who are considering being a mentor, but I think it brings some insight as well for people who just want to explore mentoring, and actually for people who are being mentored as well. And why that's important is that statistically 89% of people who are mentored actually then go on to become a mentor, which in its own right suggests there's some real value and benefit in mentoring. So what we're going to talk about this afternoon is about a little short personal reflective of mine. We're going to talk about significance of purpose and why the coaching mindset is particularly important, and how to structure a mentoring relationship. Those are three foundational elements that bring us into the major part of discussion this afternoon, which is about being an effective mentor. What I would say for people who answered that they're curious about mentoring, then a previous workshop a few weeks ago explored the subject of mentoring for personal and professional development. That recording is available through the APM website. So moving on then, personal reflective. So I've had a real active interest in mentoring over the last 5 years, more recently through the APM mentoring program. Last year, February, I joined a Women in Technology mentoring program through Technology, and in my role with Soprasteria for the last 5 years, I've been heavily involved in establishing and running a mentoring program for program project managers in our business. I've also got 4 active mentoring relationships from people who've contacted me directly through LinkedIn or similar kind of means. And really, I think where I am now professionally, I can plot back to my first mentoring experience, being mentored at quite a late age of 29. And that really opened up my eyes to my personal development as well as professional development, and set me on my career path through program management and program leadership. The role I've had for the last 5 years at Soprasteria is much more around developing a project management capability, and therefore a big element of that is the people. And mentoring has been such a powerful way to help our program project managers develop personally, as well as the professional development through training and experience and guidance in the workplace. Ultimately, I'd say that in terms of my career, and I'm 56, and my career has been quite long in program project management, the most insightful or the most beneficial, most accelerated development I've had has been in the last 3 or 4 years as a direct consequence of mentoring. So I'm a big evangelist, and I try and extol the values and the benefits of mentoring wherever I get the opportunity, such as this afternoon. And where we need to start really around mentoring. So mentoring is something that people do voluntarily. Nobody should ever be press ganged or forced into mentoring. It's something people do because they see a benefit, they see a value to it, and therefore the most fundamental thing as a foundation is purpose. And so whenever we start a mentoring relationship, and as a mentor, whenever we engage with somebody at the beginning of a mentoring relationship, the most important thing we're trying to establish is that sense of purpose. Why does the individual want to be mentored? What do they hope to gain? What are they looking for? And one of the tests, and I say test with a very small t, but one of the ways that if you're looking to enter a mentoring relationship, if you're looking to start a mentoring relationship as a mentor, is trying to encourage your mentee to open up and explain why it's important to them. And some structure around that is that in principle, they should be able to answer and ideally write down a personal statement. I understand what mentoring is, and I've made a conscious decision to enter into a mentoring relationship because. And the because will always be personal and individual, but that structure and that sense of they've made a conscious decision in understanding what mentoring is with conviction is the bedrock to start building an effective mentoring relationship. But equally, as the mentor, that sense of purpose is equally as vitally important. And so quite often, and I've done this myself, people will talk about a desire to give back, particularly the older you get, I think you'll find, but also paying forward. So there's some kind of giving element, there's some kind of support that's being offered. But ultimately, I think to be really effective as a mentor, you need to test your own purpose and be really clear in your own mind about what it is that's making you commit to being a mentor, and ideally commit to being an effective mentor. And for that to be really effective, for that to emotionally kind of give you that building blocks and that kind of momentum, it really needs to be linked to your personal development. The value that you can see gives something to you rather than just giving to another individual. So for people considering becoming a mentor, and there's a number of those, of people getting into it and trying to, become increasingly effective as a mentor, I would start by really understanding and questioning your own purpose, the value to you and what you hope and anticipate it's going to bring you. And then we move on and we think about coaching and mentoring, and the two things are very closely aligned, although there are some notable differences. And with coaching, you tend to be a lot more what we would call non-directive, and we're about to explore that. But one of the great things, as I say, is taking people, including yourself as a mentor, outside of your workplace a little bit, because you're not focused on deliverables and you're not focused on outcomes and you're not focused on work, and therefore you're not really thinking too deeply about performance. What you are thinking about as a coach, as a mentor, is about potential, your mentee's potential, and how you can kind of unlock that and help them develop and flourish. So the word potential has a number of different meanings depending on which dictionary you pick up and read, but ultimately the one that really resonates with me comes from the Cambridge Dictionary, and it describes potential as possible when the necessary conditions exist. Part of the reason that resonates is when you explore coaching and the kind of the history of coaching, how it came to be so prominent in professional kind of circles. One of the tipping points, mid 20th century, and probably you've heard of Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. You may have heard of Carl Rogers, but a movement called humanistic psychology came into being. And it was very much about looking at an individual rather than studying generally people's behavior, which had really been the focus up until then. And it really started to build this belief that everybody has within them much greater potential than they've yet realized. Everybody has an ability and a predisposition towards change and growth. And so to be effective as a mentor, to be effective in a mentoring relationship as the mentee, there really does need to be a conviction around the potential within us. And the thought process around mentoring effectively is to create those conditions that allow potential to be unleashed. In slightly more modern times, although you can tell by the dress code of a gentleman here called Tim Galway, coaching as we understand it today in professional terms came from the sporting connotation of coaching. And Tim Galway was a tennis coach. He was quite a well-renowned tennis coach in the late 70s. And he developed this concept of the inner game. And he coined a very simple equation, which I think is an easy thing to remember. And it really encapsulates a lot of what we're going to talk about this afternoon. Performance, for someone to be their very best on a tennis court, that is a combination of their potential, their innate ability to play tennis, ball to eye coordination, all of those other characteristics, minus interference. And the inner game came from the concept that the guys that he was coaching to play tennis weren't just trying to beat the opponent on the other side of the net. They were trying to beat their own mind in many ways, their self-doubt, their lack of conviction, their lack of confidence. And so interference today, when we talk about mentoring, is really about the mentee and the doubt they may have, the lack of confidence, the things they don't yet know, all of those things that kind of block realizing and unleashing potential. And so that then became a context from sport that during the course of the 1980s made its way much more into a kind of a mainstream mentoring context and became the basis for what we now know as executive coaching, life coaching. And two books here I would very strongly recommend: Coaching for Performance and Effective Coaching. I'll refer to those over the next couple of minutes as we explore coaching a little bit further. But one of the facets of being an effective mentor, being an effective coach, is a little bit about studying the ethos of coaching and mentoring. So this is an initial flavor, but I really would encourage people to explore and understand that better. It's quite stimulating, it's quite insightful. It will help you, build that context and that thought process and the ethos of being an effective mentor. And both coaching and mentoring are learning and development relationships. So the real important words there is relationship. It's about two people. And so one of the things, again, as a mentor, is thinking about what's in it for you. Not in a mercenary sense, because you're not going to get paid for it, but in a sense of how does being a mentor benefit you? How does it aid your development? And a relationship, when it's done well in a mentoring perspective, is mutually beneficial. And it's based on trust, as all good relationships are, but there's a joint commitment. And for it to be an effective, positive mentoring relationship, both the mentor and the mentee should be feeling stimulated by it. They should be feeling that it's a positive thing. It should be something that you look forward to. It's something that you take positivity out of. And development is about increasing awareness, self-awareness, but also awareness of your situation. In this case, really trying to understand your mentee, trying to understand their story, as we would call it, trying to understand the situation they're in now. And unlike the workplace, where by and large you do an annual appraisal, you set objectives for the coming year, and you've got quite a narrow view time-wise around development, mentoring is taking a much longer term view, and it's got a goal-based rather than work-based. And ultimately, you're looking to identify, nurture, and unlock potential in parallel with dampening down that interference, all of which gives rise to what we call growth. And the connotation of people growing as an individual. You could see that perhaps as confidence, you could see that perhaps as achievement, but that is at the heart of coaching and mentoring. And then the final significant kind of concept to really understand is the concept of being non-directive. And again, if you start by thinking about your workplace, and particularly if you're a project manager or a project professional, by and large, you often use the phrase perhaps directing the traffic. By nature, you're very directive in your workplace, as most people are. It's about, this has to be done by this date, here's how you do it. There's a spectrum, as you can see here, where non-directive is really trying to help people come to a level of awareness of their own situation, such they start to see options and they start to commit to action. And so on this spectrum, by and large, the coach is stopping at the point of asking questions and gaining understanding. They're trying to encourage and guide their client, as we call it, to start to understand what their options and their way forward is. From a mentoring perspective, because invariably the mentor has a good understanding, or at least a contextual understanding, of the mentee's professional context, you may go further and start to share some experience and offer some feedback. But you need to be conscious that you're moving down that spectrum, and you should use that opportunity sparingly and in the right circumstances. Otherwise, the value of the learning, the positivity of the self-awareness for your mentee gets diluted. So being non-directive is a really critical facet, and exploring that will really help you contextualize it better. So at that point, the third foundational element we're going to explore is about how, as an effective mentor, you can bring some structure to your mentoring relationships. And this is, in the same way we might look at the APM body of knowledge, That is a collection of best practice. That is a lot of clever people with a lot of years experience sharing knowledge and saying, these are the things that work best. These are the things that benefit. And the same is true of mentoring. Certain techniques and certain approaches have been proven to work most effectively. And we have a concept of a mentoring life cycle, very simple process, has a beginning and an end. And in the meantime, you're developing and nurturing a relationship, exactly as you would do with friendships or professional relationships. And the value of the mentoring life cycle is to bring structure and broadly it's directional. It gives you some kind of guidance towards how you keep that relationship moving. And it helps people contextualize. But most of all, at the very beginning, it reduces risk of failed or suboptimal mentoring relationships. And so personal experience and wider experience helps us understand that actually, at the very beginning of a mentoring relationship, the risk that it doesn't work out is greatest. And that's the same with any relationship, really. You know less about the other people. You've got less common ground. You've got less shared interests. You've got less shared values. And ultimately, this is why the beginning of a mentoring relationship is so critical. And this is why a life cycle and approach that we're going to talk through will help identify and mitigate that risk. And so quite often, and if you go back to the personal statement we discussed a few moments ago, people may come into mentoring wanting to be mentored, not really understanding what mentoring is and what it isn't. They may have unrealistic expectations on that basis. They may have heard a lot about mentoring and thinking everyone else is doing this, it must be good, let me do it, and not really have that sense of purpose. And by and large, that lack of purpose is the thing that is most likely fundamentally to stop a mentoring relationship from blossoming and being effective. It's really, really important. People may want a quick fix, and that really isn't the objective of mentoring. And they might actually want some support, some guidance, some direction that really belongs in the workplace rather than a mentoring relationship. And more widely, in any two people starting a relationship, not everybody gets that kind of spark. Not everybody gets that sense of rapport. So sometimes, purpose is there, all the ingredients are there, but it's not quite a gelling between the mentor and the mentee, and that's fine. That's life, and try mentoring again in a different kind of partnership. And sometimes it's really good to test and understand the purpose so you can actually be confident mentoring is the most effective and the most appropriate solution. It isn't always. It may be, in some cases, coaching is a better learning solution. It may be that actually something in the workplace is better, maybe shadowing somebody, depending on what the needs are. And so being really conscious and being informed and making sure there's that sense of purpose at the beginning is absolutely critical. And so when we move on from there, it's, well, okay, so what do we do in that knowledge? It's about building those secure foundations. And this is why in most cases, when you talk about coaching and mentoring, the initial discussion or initial discussions between mentor and mentee are what they call chemistry sessions. And as the name implies, it's really trying to get to know each other and explore and find common ground. Find that basis for a relationship built on trust. And by coaxing out a personal statement, trying to not just validate there's a purpose there, but more importantly, understand what it is. Really understand what is driving your mentee, so you can understand best how you help and how you support. And then we look to build, as you come out of that establishing rapport kind of phase, that initial phase is commitment statements. And this is a commitment statement that a mentee would make to their mentor, but as its relationship, there's a commitment statement that the mentor makes to the mentee as well. And it's about the shared values. It's about the ground rules for the relationship, how you're going to engage one another. And the mentoring agreement is more planning kind of based, in the sense it'll talk about, well, are we going to meet face to face? Are we going to meet via Teams? Are we going to meet monthly? Are we going to meet weekly? And it'll talk about the goals of the mentoring relationship. These are all really, really important foundational elements that go towards building awareness, building rapport, building common understanding, and creating a bedrock for a really effective mentoring relationship. One of the great things is being able to use tools and techniques. So as a project manager, for example, if you're going to embark on risk analysis, you kind of want to know what the basic approach is, and you want to know what the tools are, how you'd set about it. And so within the world of coaching, there are a number of very well established coaching models. And by far and away, in my experience, the easiest to contextualize and the easiest to apply is something called the GROW model. And this was developed by Sir John Whitmore, passed away unfortunately during lockdown, former racing driver. So he came from a sporting background, and his book reached its 5th edition shortly before he passed away. And it's a really, really good read, in my opinion. But the 4-stage model, this can be applied slightly more holistically to a mentoring relationship. Moreover, it can be applied to each and every individual mentoring discussion that a mentor and a mentee have. And very simply put, it's about talking about a goal, which could be a development kind of goal in a relationship sense. It could be something specific that the mentee wants to cover in a discussion. But from the goal and through clarity about where we're trying to get to, what is the outcome you're striving for, you then start to look at where they're starting from, the current reality as it's called, and explore the goal, explore the motivations behind it, and then start to explore what that journey looks like from current reality to the goal, where they're starting from. That then starts to open up options. And through raising awareness, the mentee will start to think about things that may work, things they could possibly do, and start to form their own picture about how they navigate that journey. And ultimately, where you need to get to is the options become a focus of some emotional attachment. There's some belief attached to it, and that is the basis for action. That's what the GROW model looks like in its simplest form. And then Miles Downey, another book I'd strongly recommend. If you're intrigued enough to buy one book by Sir John Whitmore's first, would be my guidance. But what Miles Downey did, he put a T in front of that, and the T is for topic. And it's about really understanding, before you get into the detail, your mentee's story. Now, by story, what we really mean is let's understand your mentee in a broader sense, understand what makes them tick, understand their motivations, understand, you know, what their sense of purpose looks like. Get to know them as an individual rather than get to know them as a mentee. And I really like this quote. John Quincy Adams, I think, was the 3rd president of the United States. But he said, when I hear the facts about someone, I know what they are. When I hear their story, I know who they are. And to be an effective mentor, you've got to know who you are as an individual in terms that matter, but you have to really understand your mentee as an individual to help apply your skills, your techniques, your knowledge, to help them really understand how to reach their goals. It's a really important kind of facet. 2 things I'd emphasize while we're on this particular subject. Number 1, starting by really understanding your mentee, taking your time at the start of a relationship as well. It's not a race. The investment in getting to know one another and build the foundations, a bit like when you build a house. The investment you make in the foundations for a house determines how long it stays standing. The same is very true of a mentoring relationship. So really do explore and get to know each other, and be open as a mentor as well about your drivers, about who you are. And then when we start to talk about goals, and we'll cover this again shortly, but really explore the goal without rushing to the current reality. So park where are you starting from, and don't just understand the goal as an outcome, really understand the motivations, really understand why it's important. And the danger, if you don't take the time to explore the goal first, is that the mentee will have preconceptions. I think, oh, that's never going to happen, I can't do that. And they will subconsciously or consciously rule out options because their preconditioned or their preconception says it isn't achievable. So thus far, then, we've spoken about the significance of purpose. It's a fundamental must for an effective mentoring relationship. We've explored coaching and the coaching mindset, the kind of the ethos behind that. And we talked about the structure that you can bring to bear, particularly at the beginning of a relationship, to give yourself and give your mentee every chance of a positive and sustainable mentoring relationship. So now we're into being an effective mentor. And again, if you go back to the definition of potential that I shared from the Cambridge Dictionary, creating the necessary conditions. So this is the meat of the discussion this afternoon. So I would say to start with, and it's almost like sometimes you plan a journey and you work backwards. I would think about your destination, think about your goal in terms of what exactly does a positive mentoring relationship look like. So it looks like a learning and development relationship. It looks like it's a two-way interaction. It's mutually beneficial, and there is purpose. And at the heart of it, you have trust, shared values, you're candid with one another, you've got rapport, you're both sensing that mutuality of the situation, it's beneficial to both of you, and you've shared commitments to one another. And the mentor really needs to go into mentoring committed to their own personal development, seeing the value, having the purpose, as we discussed. But ultimately, if you're going to be an effective mentor, if you're going to be effective at anything, you've got to commit to becoming effective and growing and developing as a mentor, as well as development in a broader sense for you as an individual. And that's around being person-centered, non-directive. All the things you can see in that list there is all about a facilitation, trying to create an environment, trying to create something safe, something engaging for your mentee. And for the mentee, the things you should be seeing, the things the mentee should be feeling, they should be feeling like this is a long way from my workplace. They should be feeling they're growing in confidence. They should be feeling that they're growing as an individual. And they should be exploring, and they should be curious. They should be seeking out answers and looking for help, and start to broaden out their perspective beyond the workplace, beyond the mentoring relationship. That's what good looks like. And keeping a picture of where you're trying to get to in your own mind is really, really important. Secondly, mentoring is in some regards an art. I think it's very achievable for anybody with the right mindset and the right purpose, by the way. So it's not, I don't think it's beyond anybody. These skills can be developed, and they're really important in domestic life as well as in professional life. And so the European Mentoring and Coaching Council have got a competence framework. You can Google that and get the detail behind it. But if you just glance at the kind of things that, were you to go through a coaching accreditation, you have to demonstrate, these are the things that again, people with experience, people with insight, people with knowledge have come together and determined this is the competence framework for coaches and mentors. One of the things I will draw your attention to at the bottom, point 8, is about evaluation. We'll pick up on that in a moment as well. But if you're going to be good at something, you need to kind of understand where you are at the start. You need to kind of understand how you're developing. You understand what your next steps are to develop further. So the evaluation of a mentoring relationship is really, really important as well. And that really, I would put in more plain English, practice makes perfect. And so to become an effective mentor, it is eminently achievable, as I say, so don't be put off by the fact that you've got to work at it a little bit, but it does take a little bit of time. It takes some practice. So we talk about practice in terms of a repetition. So we might practice project management at work, we might get better at planning, we might get better at reporting, we might get better at all of the various competencies because we repeat them. And every time we repeat them, we get some feedback. We look at it, we can kind of measure it, we can think that things that worked, and we refine and we apply it and we repeat. We go in that cycle of learning through practical application. And what's really important in a mentoring sense is reflection. Both the mentee and the mentor, and reflection really is just thinking about, how did that work? How did that feel? I wonder how that felt for my mentee. And feedback's really important because you're never really going to know as an individual how someone else feels until they tell you. And just recognize within that we all get feedback every day from colleagues. You'll get feedback in every session from your mentee that isn't necessarily verbal. You'll get signals, and so you'll know if you're watchful, what it looks like to your mentee. Is your mentee, grimacing at you? Never a good sign. Are they looking more engaged? Are they looking a little bit curious? Are they looking a little bit lost? And so that feedback comes in real time without being verbal, but it's always good practice to ask, at various intervals, where do you think we are? How's this working for you? What do you think's changed for you? All of those good kind of open questions. And then we talk about practice in the sense of best practice. So again, using the APM body of knowledge as an example, looking at how can I go and find things out about coaching, I want to understand more about the GROW model. Where do I find that? So short of buying Sir John Whitmore's book, you Google the GROW model and you'll get a bunch of things come back. So it's also looking at mentoring as an art, looking at it almost as if it's a craft. Explore it, study it. And supervision is a great word they use in coaching. That is about talking about your experience as a mentor with other mentors. Not always easy to engineer, but for example, the Women in Technology mentoring program that I joined last February, pretty much on a weekly basis, there's an informal group and come together. Sometimes it's open discussion and we share ideas, we share thoughts, and sometimes it's structured presentations. But if you can start to kind of connect with other mentors and share your experiences, you'll learn hugely through that interaction. So you can study the art of mentoring, the art of coaching, formally or informally. There's plenty of resources out there, but think of mentoring as a core skill. Think of it like risk management, a competence that you want to perfect, practice, and best practice. So going back to facilitating a learning and development relationship, so we've covered the nature of a mentoring relationship between peers, mutually beneficial, mutual trust and respect. The role of the mentor, primarily, facilitate, encourage, support, trying to create that environment where your mentee is relaxed and confident enough to open up to you and be candid with you and be honest about some areas that they might consider to be sensitive. Test, very small t, for purpose, to the extent that you're asking the kind of questions that lead them towards that personal statement. And I would really encourage you to encourage your mentee to see that through and write down that personal statement, because the act of writing does two things. Firstly, it makes you think. You can't unconsciously write stuff. And secondly, you've got to think about the words you're going to put on the page. And not only does it bring clarity, it also brings an emotional attachment. So writing stuff down is really important. And when we go on to talk about goals, then statistics tell us that if somebody has a goal and they tell somebody else about it, it's 40% more likely they're going to go and see that through and achieve that goal. And someone they might want to tell about that would be the mentor. So you've got to encourage that openness. And secondly, if they then go and write down that goal, they become 70% more likely to see that through. It's about clarity of purpose, it's about emotional attachment. And so really would encourage you to bring the structure around commitment statements and mentoring agreement and really give that relationship the most thorough, most sound bedrock you can create. And so the right conditions, by and large, when you look at the words on the right, these are the kind of things that your mentee should be saying, or should be feeling, or should be thinking. They should feel like a mentoring discussion with you is a safe place. It's based on trust. And sometimes, why mentoring is such a positive thing outside of the workplace is if you think about things you're required to do at work, you can be inhibited about asking a question because you don't know, because you probably feel, well, I've been told I should know, it's not going to land very well, I'm just going to kind of mask over that. There's no judgment in an effective mentoring relationship, and there's empathy, not sympathy. It's supportive. Everything is focused around the mentee's agenda. It's focused on potential. So that's how you should visualize your mentee feeling. And so what do? We set the tone and we create the climate for change. And we've all worked in programs and projects. We understand that programs and projects bring about change. We've understood at a level, at least, the change curve and the emotional kind of steps people go through. So really try and make it a safe and a supportive environment. You're definitely listening much more than you're talking, and actively listening. We'll explore that in a moment as well. And you're really trying to raise awareness. You're trying to raise awareness for yourself, so you understand your mentee better, so you can help more. But you're really trying to raise the awareness in them through asking really insightful, open questions. So they start to come to their own conclusions. They start to see a way forward. It's theirs then. They feel that ownership, and it's much more powerful learning method when you come to your own conclusions, when you're just given something as an answer and take it as read. And so you've got to be balancing supporting and stretching. People grow through being stretched appropriately. So goals. So it's really important to understand what your mentees' goals are, but it's absolutely critical to understand why their goals are important to them. Motivations is really the key. If you can understand the motivations, then you can put the goals into context. You can put the approach that you take to support your mentee into context. But if it's just expressed as a set of outcomes, you don't understand the emotional attachment. You don't really understand the significance, and therefore you're limited in terms of visibility about the guidance that you can offer, the support you can offer. And so all of these questions here and all the questions that you're seeing through the presentation broadly are open questions. So they don't solicit a yes/no answer. And if they're good questions, they're open. The answers bring you insight. There's a purpose to the question. You want to understand more. You want to build awareness on both sides. So you can start to think about the kind of questions that you might ask, and the kind of style that you might take is listening more than talking, but the questions that you ask are designed to bring some insight, bring some awareness, and to make the mentee kind of think and open up. So the role of the mentee, by and large, explore is a great word. You know, you're exploring goals. You're really trying to understand why. And through that, as we said, awareness, attachment. You know, and as I mentioned when we talked about the GROW model and T-GROW, about understanding their story, the guidance about goals. You know, you can never spend too long getting to know the mentee, step one, and you can never really spend too long exploring the goals and the motivations. And why it's important that they don't you don't move the conversation on too quickly to where are you now is the danger that you get preconceptions that just stop people consciously or subconsciously putting options forward. And I'll emphasize again that the benefit and the value of getting some stuff written down. And it takes trust for your mentee to share that with you as well. So where you're getting things written down and it's being shared with you, that is a fantastic barometer to say a flourishing relationship is building. It's one of the ways you know without asking. So then, you know, we have to recognize that change will only come with action. And so we get into what does a mentoring discussion look like? And again, it encapsulates the concepts of the GROW model. But whilst you'll start every conversation with some polite, how are you? You know, and you'll start the conversation by perhaps trying to help your mentee decompress, as it were, from their professional situation. What you want to do is really end the session with a catalyst for some kind of action. And again, a set of potential questions you might ask, but you want to come out of the discussion where your mentee has been engaged and incentivized and encouraged to take some positive action. That loops back. So I was always torn, do I start with starting or do I start with the ending? So I started with the ending and work back. So you'll go into your mentoring discussion, creating the climate, you know, creating that sense of openness and you know, a conducive environment to open up. And I would go back to your previous discussion. What steps have you taken? What have you done since we last spoke? How have things changed for you? And think about the kind of questions you want to answer. And these questions will start to come naturally with practice. You can actually go and Google question banks. That is a thing. But I think more naturally is when you use your own words, and you use your own words naturally rather than working off a script. But just think about open questions. And you'll need a plan B, because life does get in the way sometimes, and sometimes all of the good intent that came out of the last mentoring discussion has been blown off course by factors outside of your mentee's control. So you try and reattach them, you know, again through open kind of questions with the actions and the goals that they last discussed with you. But you have to be conscious what you're trying to encourage without imposing on your mentee is action. That's where the change comes from. So we spoke about, you know, your purpose as a mentor being really, really critical, mutually beneficial, your development's important. So don't lose focus as you're mentoring on your development opportunities, because a lot of the mentoring skills are leadership based, and predominantly it's around building your emotional intelligence. And anybody with friendships, anybody with you know, romantic relationships, anybody with family relationships, anybody with professional relationships will always benefit through developing emotional intelligence. And sometimes it's a difficult thing to practice. So mentoring gives you an outlet to practice that and refine that, and understand it better, understand yourself better. And active listening, for example, all in its own right, is incredibly valuable. If you want to sit in a meeting with stakeholders or colleagues or clients and start to understand the motivation, start to understand the energy in the room, start to understand the things that aren't actually being said explicitly. All of those kind of skills you can see there are leadership and emotional intelligence developing. So, which is great, personal development, great professional development. And again, attach the value to that and bring it into your consciousness about, how am I learning? How am I developing? So as well as thinking, around your mentoring relationship, how it's benefiting your mentee, always think about, how's this working for me? Am I developing? How am I developing? Where am I developing? What kind of skills do I think I've got now I didn't have before? And that will help you speed your way on that journey. So quite a well-used phrase, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. This is the Chinese symbol for listening, which is quite insightful, because there's 5 things that come out of the construct of the symbol, and only one of those is ears. And so this is really understanding somebody and understanding not what's being said verbally, but what the messages are, what the sentiment is, what the emotion is. And so as a mentor, if I was to emphasize 2 things, active listening would be the first of those 2 things. And whether you apply it in a mentoring context, whether you apply it in professional context or domestic or other, it's a fantastic skill to have and to master. It brings insight. It prevents you saying the wrong thing or acting in the wrong way. It helps build empathy. It helps build rapport. It's a really, really important thing. And then the second one, so if you were to ask me what's the second core skill, I would say asking good, open, insightful questions. And the whole intent is about raising awareness. So an open question should be thought-provoking. It should take your mentee to a position of, oh, I need to think about that. Gold dust for a mentor is you ask a question, someone says, that's a really good question. And you're trying to get insight. You're trying to help you navigate through to get to the heart of the matter. You're trying to raise awareness on both sides. And so again, asking insightful questions is another core skill. And if you think outside of mentoring for a second, in a position of conflict. So quite often you may have a really good idea or an idea you're passionate about, and you start to discuss it with other people and you get a lukewarm response. So you could get entrenched in my idea is really good, what's wrong with you type discussion, or you can kind of diffuse it a little bit and actually, through asking some open, insightful questions, you might actually get one around, as it were, to someone else's opinion. Or you might get them to think more about where their resistance is coming from. Is it emotional? Is it rational? So these are really great skills in life and not just in mentoring. One of the good quotes about coaching and mentoring is words to the effect, you don't have to have all the right answers. You just have to have all the right questions. And this is true. And sometimes though you might have the right answers, but it's more powerful and more beneficial for your mentee to actually share a connection instead. So for example, if someone says, I've got this position at work, I'm thinking about taking this course of action, what do you think? You could give them an answer, you could give them perspective. You could say, actually, on that particular subject, our colleague Susie or whomever be a great person to speak to. Why didn't you go and discuss it with Susie and see what they think? Or you might say, why didn't you discuss it with your line manager or whatever. Yeah, and they start then to get the confidence and the engagement and start to look at other people as potential sources of knowledge, insight, support. And they start to build their network. They start to grow in confidence and become more resourceful. They take more ownership. They start to think more about, how do I go and find the answer, rather than I don't know the answer, somebody tell me. So it's a great thing to do as a mentor. And one of the great things I think in a mentoring discussion is sometimes you get a pause. Yeah, and I think the best thing that you can do as a mentor is not fill it, because that tends to imply there's something that either the mentee is still thinking about, or they haven't quite been able to verbalize, or they're a little bit nervous about putting it forward. But sometimes a moment of silence in a mentoring discussion is a very powerful thing. So be conscious of that and don't don't kill the moment would be my guidance. But you're really here about trying to open up your network and trying to share connections, trying to encourage your mentee to grow in terms of their resourcefulness and their ownership of finding an answer. For sure, you both need to make time and space. Work will be demanding, life will get in the way. And so, as in any relationship, you're going to take a bit of time, a bit of work, persistence, but remain for your mentee accessible, always be understanding, always be responsive, and be prepared to adapt. And then getting towards the end, celebrate successes. So you will find that there are successes on the journey, particularly the longer the relationship lasts for. And it's really important to celebrate the successes. A number of reasons. But the first one is that your mentee will take strength from achievement. As soon as they start to see positive results that they can attribute to mentoring, you're building momentum, building their confidence, building their buy-in, cementing the relationship. But also it's a great opportunity to recalibrate. So if someone's on a journey, let's say you're going on a road journey, you stop at the services, you kind of recalibrate. What time do I think I'm going to get there now? Do we need to stop again for more fuel, whatever that may be? And so their concept of their goals, their concept of where they've got to move to next, their options will be different with every step they take and every achievement they make. And importantly, we've got to keep the workplace separate from the mentoring relationship for a number of good reasons, but it's about not blurring the edges. It's about not bringing negativity into the relationship. The most important thing is that the mentee's employer has to be the one that says what they have to do, what's expected, and how they do it. Process, procedures, methods, tools, professional standards, all of those things, that belongs in the workplace. And so, we need to be working with our mentee, encouraging them to trust into their line management and their colleagues. Empathize if they have difficult situations or conflict in the workplace, but we need to avoid bringing negativity into it. We need to be talking to them about options and what they might do, and encourage them to think about how they circumvent it. And keep them encouraged and mindful that whilst the mentoring relationship is powerful in its own right, a workplace can be very, very developmental, and they get the best of both of those learning and development solutions. And so that's the end, a little mentoring word cloud.
Thank you, Richard. That was really, really helpful and very insightful. So I know I've taken away a lot myself personally for that. Just like to really tell you about the next webinar that Richard has coming up. But while I leave that there for you to sort of perhaps catch that QR code, I'm just going to go to the questions, if I may, Richard, to see what we've got.
Okay.
Question we've got here. Please could you clarify the key differences between mentoring and coaching? So this might be a bit of a recap, but if you've got a recap you could give. There are obviously a lot of similarities, but interested to know the main differences really between mentoring and coaching.
So number one, very rarely will a mentor expect any kind of remuneration to do it, whereas coaching by and large is something professional and something that people tend to pay for broadly. But fundamentally it's about the extent of being non-directive, and so coaching is much less much more non-directive than mentoring, and also coaching has with it a sense of practice, as in a GP practice kind of sense, where you're encouraged to maintain reflective logs, you're encouraged to have supervision. It's a more structured implementation of mentoring principles in essence.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Richard. Hopefully that gives a good enough a response for that question. The next question is, have you any tips for group mentoring?
Well, I think generally different flavors of mentoring, like reverse mentoring, group mentoring, I think the key is to find effective facilitation. So there are organizations out there who will do that, but I think you need to understand the fundamental premise of mentoring in a kind of a one-to-one sense to benefit from the different formats, but definitely having experience for facilitation would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So we've got just a comment here really, which might be quite helpful. I don't know if you want to expand on, but suggest that although you might be the mentor, let them drive as they need you.
Yeah. So the important thing outside of purpose is that the mentee should increasingly be taking ownership of their own development, and they should be consciously exploring options and making the decisions about the actions that they take. So I agree with the comment about ownership on behalf of the mentee, and the mentor facilitating that level of awareness and confidence to take that ownership and do something tangible with it by way of action.
Yeah, absolutely. Another comment really, but you might have some sort of advice on how this can be handled, is one person has said that the line between line manager and mentor is a difficult one. I am a mentor in the same place as my mentee. It's difficult.
It is. So I run a mentoring program, as I said, inside Soprasteria, and we spend a lot of time talking through how not to blur those boundaries. The difference between the two, so line management is much more around performance, whilst it has pastoral kind of care. And so to be most effective, a mentor will be outside of a line management structure for the mentee.
Brilliant, thank you. Because I mean, that is quite a commonplace, isn't it? Having your mentor and mentee in the same organisation. I know I've had that experience myself.
Yeah, so people within the same organisation is fine. A lot of organisations run mentoring programs. They run really, really well, and they're effective. It's more about not an organisational separation. It's having a mentor outside of the line management chain.
Yeah, absolutely. One question is about recommendations for books, but particularly focusing on mentoring only. If you don't have any off the top of your head, Richard, we could certainly put that in an email afterwards. But if you've got some you could suggest.
Quite a memorable name, and gentleman on LinkedIn, David Clutterbuck. So two Davids, Clutterbuck and Megginson, were really, really active in establishing mentoring in the mainstream. And anything put forward by David Clutterbuck is well worth a read. And he's on LinkedIn and he publishes various articles. So that's where I would go to. But I also mentioned a quote in there from a book by a lady called Mary Pecora. That really, and it's very difficult just to separate out coaching and mentoring. They're quite closely linked. So that other book, and I'll put the 3 book recommendations in the email back to Sarah, so you can share that with the guys. But the book by Mary Pecora that I took the quote from, really, really good book. And I'd recommend that if you're more focused on the mentoring kind of elements. But it's hard to split the two out physically.
Yeah. Okay, great. There's one more question here actually that's just come in, Richard, if that's okay. Which leadership skills were the most difficult to develop? So maybe talking about for you personally.
I think my journey started with a realization about 6 years ago that I was quite low on self-awareness. So I found it very difficult to move forward from that, because the first key skill I was trying to master was around active listening. And in reality, in my professional role before Soprasteria, I spent most of my time talking and less time listening. That was the hardest thing for me personally, was developing that ability to actively listen and think more rather than diving in. That's my personal reflection.
Yeah, I guess it will be different for everyone, won't it?
Yeah.
So thank you for the questions. Really, it just leaves me to say thank you so much, Richard, for your time today. It's been really insightful. So thank you for your time, and thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.